And so it's okay to break these patterns, these rhythms. I mean, it's like jazz. It's like free-form jazz. But again, you have to know the foundations upon which the musical riffs are based. Otherwise, how can your fellow musicians or the audience follow what you're doing? Quentin Tarantino borrows story structures from other genres. In the case of Pulp Fiction, one of his best, winning an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, he borrows a circular narrative from Pulp Fiction anthologies where different stories with similar and overlapping characters are collected in one publication. But they could be read in any order, really, as the linear nature of the stories is not as important as the stories themselves. Which is all well and good, except that one of the characters in the movie dies halfway through, only to reappear in a different thread of the story, which makes the audience realize that the stories are being told out of order. Which could be a problem, except that Tarantino uses this narrative quirk to underline his theme of transformation and rebirth. Think about it. In a film where pop icons come back from the dead to serve burgers and fries, and a gangster who is sure to be shot dead is missed by every single bullet, and he takes that as a sign from God, a dead character reappearing in the story and finishing out the movie by telling an earlier part of the story last, it doesn't seem to be out of place at all. And it gives the audience a chance to reflect on these ideas, transformation and rebirth, life and death, and the meaning of it all after the movie's over. And that's the point, or one of the points at least. And Tarantino's clever structure helps light that intellectual spark. Personally, I find Story Shape to be a great tool when I collaborate with another writer, or even when I'm writing solo, just to make sure that my story is going to hold together. But it's an exercise you can do in your own appreciation of film too. Here's what I would recommend. First, just take out a blank sheet of paper. What we're going to do is draw a design, a rhythm, to reflect how any given story is told. It doesn't have to be very detailed, just enough to give some sort of shape to the story. So let's start with one that almost everyone knows, the story of the fantasy genre, The Wizard of Oz. So how would you draw a shape for that story? Think about it. It's the story of a single character, Dorothy, who goes into a strange new world by herself, and with Toto too, but essentially by herself. And then she's joined by the Scarecrow, and then the Tin Man, and then the Lion. And together they band together until the end, bound by this great adventure. Okay, so what does your story shape look like? There's no right or wrong. It's a subjective exercise. But look at it. Look at your story shape for Wizard of Oz. Now let's try another. Let's try a science fiction film, Star Wars. We know from a previous lecture that they both line up on the hero's journey paradigm, but let's see how their story shapes differ. How would you draw this story's shape? It's the story of a single character, Luke, who is joined by two droids, and then joined by Obi-Wan, and then Han Solo and his sidekick Chewie, who all band together in a great adventure to rescue the princess. Or try the heist movie Ocean's 11. You might expect this film to use the standard Y or V shape of the crime genre. But heist movies are actually a subgenre of crime, a macro genre, if you will. See the macro genre lecture for more details if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. Heist movies are rarely interested in the crime versus law dichotomy. Instead, they're more interested in teamwork and intellectual challenges, and revenge in this case. Anyway, Ocean's 11. Picture the shape of the story. It's the story of a single character, Danny Ocean, who gets out of jail and is joined by his old friend Rusty, who then go out and recruit a pickpocket, two con men, two card sharps, a security expert, an explosive aficionado, a financier, and of course the amazing Yen, who all band together in a great adventure to simultaneously rob 3 casinos in one night. Now, are you starting to see that there's a pattern to these patterns? They may be different in complexity, 4 central characters versus 6 versus 10, but still, the shapes are very similar, I would assume. And the general themes are similar if you start thinking in broad terms. Companionship, teamwork, us against them, all for one and one for all. I mean, these are the sorts of themes that you find with story shapes like the ones that you just sketched out. If this sort of exercise intrigues you, then I really invite you to put it into practice on your own. Here's a few suggested approaches. 1. Try to draw out the story shape of your favorite handful of films. Again, think in broad strokes when you sketch them out, and you'll find a few interesting things, I think. You might find that you enjoy films with similar shapes, or you might find the opposite. You might find a variety of different story shapes, but eventually, I believe that will end. Pretty soon, I think, you'll realize that there are a limited number of shapes that storytellers use. Or possibility 2. You can start here with some recommended viewings. For instance, great movies like Apocalypse Now, The Road Warrior, Thelma and Louise, and the post-apocalyptic gut punch The Road, based on Cormac McCarthy's excellent novel, by the way. They all fit into the same, or at least similar, pattern. Watch a few of them to see if you can determine their similarities, both structural and thematic. You could also add to this list the more uplifting film from 1999, The Straight Story. If you've never seen The Straight Story, I highly recommend it. It's directed by the off-kilter David Lynch. However, it's anything but. It's a terrific road movie about a man setting off on a tractor to visit his dying brother. It's a wonderful slice of life movie. Highly recommended. The same with Little Miss Sunshine or Captain Fantastic, all 3 great movies. Similarly, you could compare the 1973 thriller Day of the Jackal to the modern western No Country for Old Men, and the sports movie Bull Durham while you're at it. And if you want to go international, throw in the 1962 romance Jules and Jim. All of these have very similar story shapes, despite coming from 3 very different genres. Or number 3, if you feel that you have a grasp on the basics of story shape, you can challenge yourself and your assumptions by trying to analyze the rhythm and shape of films like Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, which I already mentioned, or the classic gangster film Godfather 2, or the mind-bending breakout film by Christopher Nolan called Memento. Each of these films is unique in its own way, and yet each strongly connects its structure to the ideas found within the story itself. Writers-directors such as these seem to use recognized story shapes as a foundation upon which they can build more complex patterns. They then use these complex patterns to subvert the audience's expectations in surprising and enjoyable ways. Because film is an art. It's not paint by numbers. As I said before, it's jazz. It's an artistic code. Films are a dance between the stories of its characters, and through editing, we jump from character to character, from story to story. And this editing creates a rhythm and a shape to the film. Although unrecognized by most, these story shapes strongly affect the way that we watch and the way that we enjoy great movies. So in closing, I'd like to quote the late, great Roger Ebert. He said, "Hoosiers. It's a movie about a tiny Indiana high school that sends a team all the way to the state basketball finals in the days when schools of all sizes played in the same tournaments and a David could slay Goliath." This story structure is almost as sacred to Hollywood as basketball is to Indiana. No truer words were ever spoken.